Grandpa John's bookshelf presents the button that wouldn't be thrown away written by Grandpa John. On the second shelf, tucked behind a stack of old paperbacks and a carved wooden whistle, there's a small glass jar filled with bits and pieces, things too precious to toss, too quiet to speak unless you really listen. One of those things is a button. It's small. Just 4 holes and a soft, pearly shine worn thin with time, a chip along the edge. If you didn't know better, you might think it was nothing at all. But oh, this button has stories. It began its journey on the wool coat of a girl named Alina, sewn on by her mother's careful hands during a long winter when warmth was a kind of love. That coat kept Alina safe through snowy days and stormy nights. She'd run her fingers over that button when she was scared, or when she needed to remember home. Years later, when the coat grew too small and too worn, Alina saved the button, tucked it into a tin of pins and string like a secret. Then came me, Alina's daughter, who found the button and gave it to her favorite doll, Millie. She sewed it onto a little felt cloak and whispered that it was a magic button, one that could protect her from bad dreams. Me held onto that belief longer than she'd admit. Time passed, as it does. Me had a son named Henry who discovered the button in a sewing box while hunting for treasure. He named it Moon Eye. It became a dragon's eye, a pirate's medallion, and once even a lost star. It rode in his pocket every day through school, the park, even into the bath, which made quite a mess. And still, it was never thrown away. Years turned. Henry grew up. The button found its way into a drawer, then a box, then the attic, forgotten for a while but not lost. One day, me, older now, slower in her step, opened that box looking for something else. And there it was, that same little button, still with its chip, still with its shine. She held it for a long time. Not because she needed it for a coat or a doll, but because it meant something. It was Alina's winters. It was Millie's magic. It was Henry's wild adventures. So she placed it in a glass jar on her shelf, a home for treasures not measured in gold, but in memory. Some buttons fasten coats, some fasten moments, and some, like this one, fasten hearts. Seasons passed once more. The button stayed in that jar, resting beside a ribbon from me's wedding bouquet and a ticket stub from a long-ago carousel ride. Henry's daughter, Sophie, sometimes came to visit. One afternoon, she pointed at the jar and asked, "What's that?" Me smiled. "That," she said, "is the button that's been part of our family longer than any of us." Sophie's eyes widened. "Can I hold it?" Me hesitated just for a moment and then gently opened the jar. She placed the button in Sophie's small hand. It fit perfectly. "Will it be mine one day?" Sophie asked. "If you promise to never throw it away," Me said. "I won't," said Sophie. And so the button waited again, this time not to be lost, but to be passed on. Because sometimes the smallest things are the ones that carry the longest stories. Years later, Sophie had a family of her own. The jar sat in a sunlit kitchen window between flower pots and watercolor brushes. Sophie had become a storyteller, not on stages, not in books, but in moments, bedtime, campfires, quiet walks. Her son, Jack, grew up hearing the story of the button. When Jack left for school, Sophie sewed the button onto the flap of his travel satchel. "Don't lose it," she said. "This button has always known its way back home." Jack carried it everywhere. He touched it during exams. He rubbed it on train rides. When the world felt too big, the button reminded him of smaller things, his mother's voice, his grandmother's smile, the safe weight of home. Once, the satchel was stolen. 3 days later, he found it again, and the button was still there. Somehow. Years passed. Jack married. He had a daughter, Ava. One day, Ava tugged at the old satchel and asked, "Daddy, what's this?" Jack lifted her into his lap. "That's the button that's been waiting for you." He told her the whole story. Alina, me, Sophie. and how something so small had carried so much love. Ava held the button between her fingers, like a tiny treasure, turning it gently. "What's it for?" she asked. "It's for remembering," Jack said, "and for keeping things safe." And Ava, even at 5 years old, nodded, as if she already knew. The button was removed from the satchel and placed in a new jar with a fresh label. The button that wouldn't be thrown away. Inside were other things too. A broken crayon, a dried forget-me-not, a folded paper star, and the button. The button, chipped and dulled, still shined when held in the light. It was no longer just a thing passed down. It had become part of the family, a quiet storyteller that asked for nothing but to be remembered. And perhaps someday Ava would give it to her child, and they would press it into their palm and say, "I don't know how it's still here, but it is." And they would carry it forward as all the others had. Because the button wouldn't be thrown away, not while there was love, not while there were stories, not while hands still knew how to hold something small and say, "This matters." For personal use only. You may not copy, change, alter, edit, or revise or distribute, either in person or online. All rights reserved by the author.